Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I hope everyone can hear me well. Hi, I'm really delighted to be speaking to all of you this morning. I'm Tatev, as Katie mentioned. I'm a senior research fellow at Ranking Digital Rights, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you have at the end of my presentation. First, let me start by going through the agenda so you know what to expect from me this morning. I am going to do a brief introduction to Ranking Digital Rights and its main project, Corporate Accountability Index. Then I will introduce you to the digital standard and our partnership with Consumer Reports. Then I would like to cover the essential consumer values that are reflecting in the standards that constitute the digital standard. And then I will talk about how we use the digital standard to rank, rate, and report on various products, and then what sort of impact we do have and hope to have, as well as some of the challenges that we encounter in this type of work, some recommendations for various stakeholders, especially consumer organizations, and then I will leave the remaining time for questions and answers. So first, let me start by talking about Ranking Digital Rights. For those of you who don't know what it is a research initiative housed at New America. It sets global standards for how companies in the information and communication technology sector should respect user human rights. The project produces an annual corporate accountability index that ranks the world's most powerful internet and mobile, as well as telecommunication companies, on their commitments and policies that affect freedom of expression and privacy. As you can see from this slide, we evaluate 22 companies, large companies that are spread all over the world, 62 services on 35 indicators. And then we cover various areas of privacy and freedom of expression within those indicators. I've provided a link to the index at the end of the presentation, and I would invite everyone to check it out. This is our main project, Corporate Accountability Index, but that is not the only project that we work on. One of the other projects that we work on in partnership with Consumer Reports is called the Digital Standard. First of all, the Digital Standard is an open source project that includes essential privacy and security standards that I will get into in the next few slides. It was collectively developed by Consumer Reports, Ranking Digital Rights, the Cyber Independent Testing Lab, and a few other organizations. If you look at the digital standard, you will see that some of its methodology, some of the standards that are included in there are either directly borrowed or adapted from the corporate accountability methodology. So the primary goal of the standard is to provide an effective assessment framework to consumer organizations or researchers or anyone really to evaluate and test products, internet-connected products and services, and inform users so that they can make smarter choices. Another goal that we hope to set is to provide some sort of a roadmap to manufacturers in their design of products as well as policy considerations. I will go into the digital standard. So the standard is divided into 4 main categories. It covers security, privacy, ownership, as well as governance and compliance. In each of these categories, we have multiple tests and standards which define and reflect essential consumer values that we think that must be addressed in a product development. First of all, the principles that led our work are the following, right? Products should be secure. Consumer information should be kept private. Consumers should have and maintain ownership rights, and products should be designed in a way that help protect privacy and other human rights, such as freedom of expression. So within each of these categories, we have multiple tests. So for example, within security, we look at product stability, encryption, authentication, and security oversight, and many others. By the way, this is not an exhaustive list. Within privacy, we look at data control, data retention and deletion, privacy by default, and others. And within ownership, for example, we look at functionality of the product over time, as well as the possibility to repair the product, right? Within governance and compliance, we may look at threat notification by the manufacturer and service provider. We will look at transparency reporting. And I'm going to give you in a second some specific examples of the standards that we want to see products and their manufacturers to adhere to. So for example, when you look at security oversight, this is what we expect of the manufacturers and service providers. We want them to limit and monitor access to user information. That's very important. We want each manufacturer to have a security team that does an internal risk assessment. We also want them to commission third-party security audits. So those are some of the standards that we look at, we want to see. In the privacy by default, for example, we want to see targeted advertising to be off by default. We also want to see that the user interface settings that are optimal for privacy are set by default. For example, if you're using a smart TV, the video ACR should not be on by default to collect consumers' viewing data, right? Consumers need to have a choice to actually decide whether they want to turn such tools on or off. In the functionality over time, we want companies to provide information about the product lifecycle. And then we want support of the functionality during the full cycle, for example. In the governance and compliance, for example, in transparency reporting, we want companies to provide information about the data requests that they receive by government authorities as well as private parties, and to sort of be transparent about what information they share, as well as under what circumstances they share this information. So those are the standards that we expect that are included in the digital standard and based on which we and others are actually assessing products. So this leads me to the next part of our partnership with Consumer Reports. So the first part was developing this methodology, which is a continuous process. We continue to develop it day to day. The second part of the partnership is actually taking this tool, assessing various IoT products, and informing, ranking, rating, reporting on various products so that we can inform consumers. So I personally lead this partnership with Consumer Reports, and since last year, 2017, I've been evaluating various categories of products, many very interesting products, and you may have seen that Consumer Reports published the results of our first findings on smart TVs. Our findings on smart TVs were quite interesting. They actually revealed that the security vulnerabilities in two of the TV brands, Samsung and TCL, could allow a hacker to remotely take control of the TV, to change the channels, to actually change the values, which could be pretty disturbing to a user. And of course, all of the smart and internet-connected TVs that we looked at collect a lot of information, which they send back to various third parties, right? Not only to the TV manufacturers and the software providers, but also to marketers and various intermediaries that deliver content, process payments, or warranty claims. The interesting thing is that when they collect viewing data, they actually can combine that with other information about users, such as demographic data, to use it in commercial settings. So no big surprise there. And unfortunately, as we all know, is true about a lot of the IoT devices is that they do not always give a lot of control to users to limit this type of information collection without losing the features that make these devices smart in the first place. And that's also true about the smart TVs. We have actually evaluated a lot of other products, and you should stay tuned because I know that Consumer Reports is planning to publish more results of our assessments. The good news is we are not the only ones that are using the digital standard to evaluate products. I know that Mozilla Foundation has also partnered with various stakeholders, including journalists, to test products with some of the indicators adopted from the digital standard. Their scope is a little smaller than ours, but last year, for example, for their holiday user guide, they looked at smart toys and published a really good list of the products, their vulnerabilities, whether they spy on users or not, whether they share information with third parties, including advertisers. And that is really great because that's exactly what we would like to see organizations to do. We want them to use this tool, the digital standard, to evaluate products and inform consumers and help them make really smart purchase decisions. So as we do this work, I really want to highlight the significance of assessment frameworks such as the digital standard for consumer empowerment and for creating a positive change in manufacturers and service providers' privacy and security behaviors. First of all, I think understanding privacy and security of Internet of Things, especially the risks and implications to users personally, can be extremely difficult for an average consumer. I think it's even difficult for researchers and experts like me who do this for a living, let alone for an average consumer. Hence, I think that's why it's really significant that consumer organizations, researchers, journalists, and others use these tools to highlight the products that meet or fail the standards and help consumers make informed purchasing decisions. Because, as we all know, user empowerment and choice are really critical in the evolution of the IoT, which is still very immature. So, if we can help consumers to shop a little smarter and make privacy and security part of their decision-making process, I think we can definitely encourage companies to respond and to do better. So when we think about creating impact, definitely consumer empowerment and choice is one of the avenues that we hope to do this, and I believe we are doing it along with others. The second avenue by which we try to have a positive impact on the privacy and security practices of these IoT manufacturers and Internet and other service providers is by leveraging their reputation. When consumer organizations, researchers, and reporters publish scores and reports like the one CR does or the one that RDR does, we definitely shine light on poor performance, and we also reward the good performance with positive attention. And I think those sorts of work and the related positive and negative coverage becomes an incentive for companies to improve their practices to manage their reputation. In fact, if you look at our index from last year and this year, like 2017 and 2018, which is available on our website, and compare the company's performance, you can see that there have been improvements in their practices. And I want to say that some of these improvements can be directly attributed to the work that we've been doing, to the engagements that we have had with the companies, helping them understand what they actually need to do to better protect users' privacy and freedom of expression. So it's another very important avenue. Furthermore, I think evidence-based findings that we and others do, highlighting privacy weaknesses and security vulnerabilities, can definitely be leveraged by advocacy organizations, shareholders, and users to demand more accountability from the companies. I think that there are there's a lot more interest by investors to actually invest in socially responsible companies, which increasingly includes not only their environmental performance, but also their performance on human rights, including privacy. So that's another really important avenue by which this type of work can actually have a positive impact. So that's why I would love to see more and more organizations doing these sorts of work, right? So besides the work that we're doing, I think it's natural that we also face some challenges. Challenges are many, but I'm going to only mention two that as a researcher stand out to me, right? I want to say that just as manufacturers face challenges with data management processes and security of IoT systems, we also face challenges in capturing the privacy and security of products holistically, because they have, considering their decentralized data processing, their complex ownership structures, and the supply chains, right? Sometimes you evaluate a product and you look at its privacy and security, and that's great, but we also know that there is a lot more that is going on behind the user interface. There are so many more actors that are involved in provision of the product, and yet we do not always easily capture everything that is going on. And that leads me to our second challenge, which is that we have a limited ability to actually test the security and privacy of products beyond the user interface and beyond the public disclosure. There are some areas where our engineers are actually able to test technically for the privacy and security, but for most of the tests and most of the standards, we actually have to rely on public disclosure. We have to rely on what companies say about their practices and what others say about their practices. And that's great, but sometimes you run into a problem that a company may have a really great practice, but no disclosure. And then a company may actually have a really good disclosure and look good on paper, but in reality not have the best practices, right? So those are the two challenges that stand out to me as someone that is trying to assess those products and develop more standards. But they're not, I know that this is not an exhaustive list, obviously. And then I am going to, end my presentation with a couple of basic recommendations. First of all, I want to say that in an ideal world, all the users, of course, will carry out some vital checks before buying and using products, right? We would want them to read privacy policies, figure out the encryption and authentication practices of the products, but it's most likely not happening and most likely not going to happen anytime soon because it's just too much to expect of consumers. But one thing that all the consumers can do, in the very least, they can do an online search to see endorsements of products from unbiased, reliable organizations, such as the Consumer Reports or Ranking Digital Rights and others, right? And they can find out if there have been any privacy and security concerns related to the products before purchasing and using it. I know that they already do that when they look at product reviews for other parameters, such as cost, user interface, and reliability. So we should help them to make privacy and security a critical purchase decision as well. So in that note, I want to lay out a couple of recommendations and say that very importantly, I think that we should encourage all of us, we should encourage stakeholders to work together on the development of open source consensus-based standards. I really see the value in open source projects like the digital standard, and I also think that consensus is really important because as we see more and more organizations looking at products, reviewing products, and publishing results, it's going to be really important to have some sort of consensus of what is a really good standard, because we don't want to confuse the consumers. We actually want to help them make better decisions. I also would say definitely continue doing reviews. For example, the digital standard is owned by no one. It's owned by everybody, I want to say. So anybody can take it and use it to review and publish reports and identify vulnerabilities and strengths of the products. So we should continue doing that. We should produce buyer and user guides. We should help users understand the risk scenarios that are related to various IoT product categories and the specific products, because sometimes it's really difficult for the user to operationalize and understand what are the risks, what is the worst thing that can happen to me if I use the product. So I think it's our role to actually help them understand that. And then I think we should also help users to optimize the settings and controls of the products. The options aren't always many, but I absolutely love seeing the how-to stories by various media organizations, but Consumer Reports and others that explain how to turn off the snooping tools, how to maximize the privacy controls that exist. So we should all continue doing that. I also want you to encourage you to actually visit our Corporate Accountability Index. I've provided the links here. I also want to encourage you to visit the digital standard. And I also encourage every one of you to actually make contributions to the digital standard on GitHub. We take into account all of the suggestions and recommendations that people from the community make. We meet we have these governance meetings where we discuss the suggestions and then we make recommendations and changes to the digital standard. It's a work in progress. And if you look at it, you can see that some of the areas need more development than others. And I want to solicit everybody's help in actually making it into a more comprehensive tool that reflects the development in various technologies in IoT. I think that my time is about up. So I would like to leave the remaining of the time for you to ask questions to me. Does that sound good, Katie?
Yes, it does. And thank you so much for that great presentation. Really appreciate it, and was so good to hear more about your work. It looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. And I also would encourage anyone else, if you have questions at this time, please feel free to put them in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself or put your hand up and I can unmute you, and you're more than welcome to ask them to the whole group. Let's see, we can start with Martin's questions in the chat. He asked, first of all, are you looking at this for all things or at the level of IoT service? And Martin, I'm not sure at which point in the presentation that came, but I will let you clarify if needed.
Okay. Thanks, Tata, for your presentation. Well appreciated. There's a couple of issues that came up for me a bit deeper than this. First is, obviously, you can set standards, and you can set those standards for products. And then the products will be used in different scenarios, different circumstances, so they have different effects. So there's the question, so where do you focus on in your risk scenario assessments? At the level of service or at the level of product? So that's my first question. And then the second one would be, so how do you make consumers aware of the risk scenarios? And that has two elements. One is, how do you reach out? And secondly, how do you make sure the information is accessible? Like, I don't know, using signs or symbols or text, in the understanding that consumers are not experts in the field of security nor privacy. So how do you do that? So those two questions.
Sure. So I'll try to answer the first question, which I understand is about what sort of products we assess and how do we approach it, right? So when we assess the products, we look at the device and all of the respective applications. And we look at them from the standpoint of some of the standards that I mentioned. Understandably, when consumers use the products, they can have some more unintended consequences that we cannot control, right? So if you take an IP camera, for example, the goal of any IP camera is to provide you with some sort of a surveillance tool, right? You may put it outside your home and it may help you be secure. At the same time, you, by using it, may be breaching somebody else's privacy, right? So that's not something that our standards are looking at. But the things that we want to look at the product level is, you know, we want to see the products to have encryption, right? When it collects the information, we want to make sure that it is encrypted in transit and it is encrypted when it is resting at the company's server. But we cannot prescribe very specific standards on how the users themselves should actually be using the products. But what we can expect the companies to do is to be very clear about what the rules are, right? To be very aware of what some of the risks are. So if you look at the terms of service on privacy policies of any company, they will tell you what the rules are and what you should not do. And whether they enforce it or not is another question. But we also have standards looking at that. So in the ownership category, for example, we say that the company should be very explicit about what users can and cannot do, right? And some of which will be using a product illegally, using a product to breach somebody else's privacy. So we want that. We want the manufacturers to be very explicit, provide examples to the user, and we also want to see some sort of enforcement. And that's all we can ask from a product and manufacturers. That's our role. We cannot really control that, but that's the level of expectations that we can set, so that not only we educate the consumers, but also the manufacturers do their best to educate the consumers. And I hope that answers your question more or less. Let me know if it doesn't, and I'll get into it more. In terms of how do we make our results available to users, various channels. Well, as you know, Consumer Reports has millions of subscribers, right? So they publish reports which can be accessed both by their subscribers but also publicly. It's also a very reliable, objective, and high-profile organization. So when it publishes results, such as the smart TV findings, it actually made a lot of media attention. We saw a lot of other organizations publish it. And so their role model and our at Ranking Digital Rights is very different. They publish things in very simple language that is very easily understandable by an average user. That's what their goal is. At RDR, we publish it in a different way because our target audience is not the user. You know, we're targeting the companies, the policymakers, the investors. So like, I think there are various ways to achieve that, and media definitely plays a big role in this. So being connected, you know, leveraging all the channels that we have, basically doing our best. Media, our own channels, various stakeholders.
Yes, just on that, I get it, and thank you for that. And in a way, you focus on the multipliers with your messages. That's clear. The message itself can be a story, a text. It could also be a symbol or something that you would urge manufacturers to use to indicate in a simple and uniform way what the impact would be. Like, will data be shared? Will data be stored? Will data leave your home in a way? Is that in your thinking too, or is that something more for the future? I know some others are working on that too.
We are currently not working on that. So if you look at the digital standard, we do not cover that. But I know that other organizations are actually trying to come up with similar projects, like trust marks, right? There is the initiatives on creating maybe some sort of labels for IoT products that are more simple and let consumers know whether a product is actually meeting the most essential few criteria. But we're not doing that now.
Thank you very much. Clear.
Cool.
Well appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin, for your questions. Do we have any other questions, either in the chat or by raising your hand? Seeing nothing yet, I wonder, Tatev, if you could tell us a little bit about, or a little bit more about where you hope to see the project go. Is there kind of a pie in the sky end goal for the project?
Well, the end goal of the project is its long-term goals, which is to make it more comprehensive, to make sure that it actually addresses a lot of the evolving issues that various IoT products in different industries raise, and that stays current. For us to do that, we need to develop all of its areas that are still work in progress and that are still underdeveloped. It's not to say that in its current form it's not working. It's a great tool and it works for many different IoT products. I've been testing using the tool on 4 categories of products, and most of the questions that we answer work very well. But if you look at the digital standard, you will see that there are areas in red that need further development. There are areas in yellow that need a little bit more development. So to meet our end goals, we would like to see more engagement from various stakeholders, from experts who could actually look and recommend some more standards. We understand that it's going to take a long time, and it's not something that will happen in one day, but please, that's why I'm encouraging everyone to contribute, to help us shape it, to make it more comprehensive so that others can use it and inform consumers. That's basically the end goal, you know, just informing consumers, using it as an assessment tool, reporting, writing, ranking, rating, whatever it is that your organization is doing, just use it to do to help consumers. We also hope that it serves as a roadmap for different companies, especially the companies that do not have the large resources or the cultural understanding of the standards that are stipulated in the digital standard. If you look at the tech industry, for example, they have a very good understanding of what, you know, security expectations are, what privacy expectations are. But some of the IoT products come from industries that do not have that cultural understanding of those standards. So I think especially for those manufacturers, especially for small manufacturers, this standard can really be a good roadmap to see what are the standards, the basic requirements that a product should actually meet before it goes to the market. So those are the two main goals.
And I see Martin has his hand up. So Martin, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, me again.
Right.
Now we do this beautiful thing here with really a multi-stakeholder community in Canada to see how we can make IoT safer and in the first place to consumers.
Mm-hmm.
So if you would advise us, knowing that different stakeholder groups are there, what should we do? I appreciate what you do. And I get some ideas from that, but you may have some ideas yourself.
I think what you're doing is already great. We definitely have a great, at RDR, great appreciation of engaging with various stakeholders and hearing everybody's side of the story. So I'm not going to, I would refrain from giving prescriptive recommendations, but I would say just engaging with stakeholders and coming up with some key recommendations for IoT manufacturers would be really great. One thing that I like seeing in GDPR, and I've liked seeing in the reports and recommendations coming out from other governments, including the UK government, is this awareness that because IoT supply chain is so complex, that perhaps we should also create some sort of guidance for how they should review and choose their own vendors, because it's becoming more and more essential. I think it's not just enough to put out recommendations for the manufacturers themselves, but it's also important to help them to figure out how to partner with their third parties that still provide parts of the product or process data on their behalf. So like that's one area that I've seen some engagement and conversation, and I think that's really important. Yeah, I'm not sure if the answer is always policies or regulations, but I would really like to see some very good key recommendations that every product manufacturers and service providers should adhere to. So kind of raise awareness about those issues.
So I didn't read I didn't look yet at the digital rights ranking, but I will. What does it say for Canada specifically? To where should they pay attention to? What, you may check this out.
All right. So if you look at the companies that we evaluate, do you still see my screen, by the way?
Yeah.
I had shared, right? So we evaluate, we don't necessarily say users in Canada, but we evaluate Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, all these global companies that are also used by Canadian users. So I do definitely encourage you to see how companies do. And they don't do very well. I mean, I'm sure that's not a surprise, right? And by the way, the Ranking Digital Rights and Corporate Accountability Index, evaluates internet and mobile and telecommunication companies. I just want to make sure that it's clear that that's our main project, that's what we do, but this digital standard and IoT is a side project that we do in partnership with Consumer Reports.
Well, beautiful. Can we add our friends from .ca to the list for you to assess? How do we do that?
I am gonna have to get back to you about that. I'm not sure, but definitely feel free to use the results because again, it's open source. All the data is available for anybody to use in their decision making, to use in their reporting. We make it available, all the data and all the reports. So feel free to just use it for your own purposes.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions in either, let's see, I'm not sure actually if the people on the phone are able to unmute. There we go.
Hi, Katie. This is Taylor Bentley from ISED. Can I ask a question?
Please do.
Excellent. I'm also joined by Pamela Miller, Charles Noir, and Luisa Paez from the Internet Policy and Governance branch, or sorry, the Telecommunications and Internet Policy branch. Thanks very much for organizing this this meeting and this discussion. Where I think the group was very well aware on the June 21st meeting that there are many standards out there, and there's a lot of really good work that this initiative can kind of build on. And I think one of the I'm not sure how much you've shared on the actual the breakdown of what the working groups will be like, but we know we don't really have a standards working group per se, but we're focused more on labeling. How do we convey that a device has met a certain standard or reaches a certain baseline of expectations? And one of the first steps identified for this group was after we have kind of done an assessment and ultimately a gap analysis of all of the different standards in this space, including this digital standard. So I appreciate it being drawn to the group's attention. We were going to look at what are the requirements for a label. So we know a standard looks at several different, categories, but ultimately what we convey in a label will be, the most salient or the most resonant, the most urgent pieces of information that a consumer needs to see on the box, on the outside. So I'd appreciate any insight that out of like this massive digital standard that looks at many different elements, which ones are the most critical and immediate that need to be conveyed, for instance, on a label on the outside of the package? Thanks.
That's a really great question. Thank you for that. I probably have to think longer about distilling this long list of questions. We have probably about 100-something questions that we try to answer when we assess products. So I think it's really difficult to say which ones are the most important. But as a consumer, when I buy a product, there are a number of questions that interest me, for example. Like, I would like to that's one very simple, essential question. Is the product going to use my data actually for monetizing, or am I only paying for the product and that's it, right? Like, just understanding the business model is one thing that is important to me. And I think to many consumers might also be important. Understanding whether the data, especially considering that some of the data that IoT products collect are quite sensitive, right? We're talking about audio and video content. So it's essential for us to know as consumers whether that sort of sensitive information is actually shared for advertising purposes. Because once it is, then we know that it's just shared with many third parties. And you don't want your video content from your cameras to be shared with advertisers, for example. So like, I think going through the list and figuring out what are some of the essential things that make sense for each product category will be the first step that I would advise you do. And I'm imagining that that may differ from a product to a product, right? But those couple of things are very important to me. Basically, the advertising aspect, the business model, I think also the privacy controls. You may remember that during the presentation I shared the privacy by default. I think that's very essential, that users have some control over the privacy settings and are able to make the settings into optimal. So like app permissions, you using IoT devices that have apps, you should be able to control the app permissions, right? You should be able to control whether your data is used for advertising purposes or not. So like privacy by default is also really essential. But yeah, I can think about that more. What are the most essential? Because I really like all of them. Obviously, we think all of those are essential. That's why they ended up in the digital standard. But yeah, I'm happy to engage with you more on this.
Yes, please. And again, fully understood. I know we have many different pieces and ways to analyze these, but I did really like your thinking as far as the business model, because it as you say, it gives consumers the ability to make a more discerning choice. Because if, for instance, the video is being or if some kind of analytical information is being shared on the individual, you would expect at the very least there would be some benefit given back to the user. Around the room here, we're just saying, it could result in discounts or special coupons being conveyed, or some kind of efficiency in the way that your smart home ecosystem is set up. But I guess even the angle, the way you approach it is really important. We have to kind of think about what the consumer cares about, what they expect, and what they ultimately would need through a label should be determined more or less by them rather than by us. And then maybe on that note, if I can ask a follow-up question, have you seen good data on what people are responding to, or what elements they seem most concerned or ignorant about?
I'm not sure. I know that I know about some academic work on consumers' perception of privacy. I'm not sure about applied research and organizations doing that, but I'm aware of a couple of academic works that I'm happy to refer to you afterwards if you connect with me. But I absolutely agree. I think that it would be really good to engage with various stakeholders, including maybe doing like some focus groups and finding out in each product category, what is it that users are most concerned about? I imagine one of the things that they will also be concerned about is sort of the functionality of the product over time, because that's really important too if you think about it. When you pay for a product, and some of those products are not the most affordable, you want to know how long your product is going to function, and you want to know that the manufacturer is going to provide the functionality over the life cycle. But first of all, you want to know what the life cycle is. Is it 2 years, 3 years, right? You want to know. So that's another area that I imagine a consumer would be interested in. And sometimes consumers are not aware of, what is most important unless you talk to them and help them understand what the stakes are. So that's another thing that I think is our role, to help them understand what the stakes are in each of these products and product categories. Because to me, it seems obvious that functionality should be important, but it may not. You do focus groups and you may find out that not many users think about it. So yeah, I definitely would advise you engage with various stakeholders, users, and I will share some resources with you about users' perceptions on privacy.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks again for the presentation.
Sure.
Thanks, Taylor, for your questions. Looking in the chat, Alan, yes, happy to circulate the recording of this webinar if that's what you mean. I think, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had talked about putting this up on the project website. Correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Great. Alan, is that what you mean, or do you mean the slides themselves? The slides. Tatev, is it okay with you if I circulate the slides after the presentation?
Yes, absolutely. And please feel free to ask any questions afterwards. I think I provided my email in the first slide, so you should be able to connect with me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you think of after the presentation as well, after this conversation is over.
All right, do we have any other questions?
Don't be shy, fire them away.
I have a quick question. If you could go back to the map, it's just a point of clarification.
All right, let me go back to the map.
These are organizations that you've done an assessment of. These aren't partner organizations, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
These are companies that Ranking Digital Rights assesses yearly through the project. Our main project is Corporate Accountability Index. And what it actually does, it evaluates all these companies that are listed on the map. There are 22 companies on their commitments to privacy and freedom of expression and practices that affect freedom of expression and privacy. We look at 22 companies, 62 services on 35 indicators. And indicators are essentially standards. They're standards that have their own elements, all of which is available on our website, and you can look at how they actually did this year or last year. We have comparative as well. So it's really good that we do this continuously, because you can also see, the changes in the company's transparency and commitments to privacy and freedom of expression.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Don. All right, do we have any other questions? If not, then I think I will go ahead and say, Tatev, thank you so much for this presentation. I know I learned a lot, and I think it seems like everyone else did as well, and really appreciate all of your input, and hopefully we can use this work, your work, in coordination with our own work in the Enhancing IoT Security Project. And I will put this webinar up online soon, and then would be happy to keep the conversation going in the various Slack groups and listservs. And Tatev, happy to add you to the consumer education working group as well if you're interested.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you everyone for organizing, attending, asking questions. It's always lovely to engage on this important topic with others. Feel free to connect with me afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.